let me show you something that's about to change how you build AI workflows forever. I've already covered the n8n MCP node on this channel, where there's some massive new updates that I had to test immediately. It now builds workflows directly inside n8n for you. No more copy and pasting. Plus, it validates everything that it makes automatically. So here's the problem we're fixing. Most people spend days connecting nodes, debugging errors, and tweaking prompts just to build one decent AI agent. It's pretty exhausting, and honestly, there is a better way. And this tool has blown up to 1.5k stars on GitHub for good reason. It won't completely replace manual workflow building just yet, but it will get you to an 80% finished workflow ridiculously fast. So today, I'm putting it to the ultimate test, where we'll build 3 complex agents from scratch: a deep research agent, a lead enrichment process, and a Reddit social intelligence agent, and see how quickly this thing can actually work. It's by far the most impressive workflow builder I've tested out so far. So let's see if it lives up to the hype. So let's quickly talk about the n8n MCP. So it was created by Romuald, and Romuald has basically identified that there's this big issue with workflow creation, that it doesn't have enough context to n8n's actual documentation, the node properties, the node operations. So this GitHub repository has all of the instructions, and I'll link it down below in the description. You can see the URL up here as well. It's got a little safety warning about don't let it edit in production workflows, which is kind of helpful there. And then we've got the full configuration down here. So we're going to do the installation that's for Claude Desktop. And what we're going to do is allow it the full configuration so it can actually manage and import our flows into n8n directly. If you just do the basic configuration, then it will give you the copy paste workflows, but won't actually interact with your n8n environment. And it looks a bit complicated, but it's actually very simple to set up. The 2 things you need: Docker. So Docker will help package this up effectively. So we're going to download Docker Desktop and make sure that you have that on your laptop. And the second thing is Claude Desktop. So you need the desktop app to be able to do this. And it's a very simple setup once you've done that. Inside your terminal, so you're going to search for your terminal, you're going to run a command, and that command is inside this repository. So you're going to run docker pull ghcr.io, and you're just going to copy that command line. I'm going to open this up here, and I've already got it installed, but this will pull the latest Docker container of the n8n MCP, which means it's then on your laptop inside Docker operating, so that Claude can actually pull from it and use it. So it's going to install exactly like this. It's going to say, great, all done. So you're then going to move to the full configuration here, and we're just going to copy that. And there's a few things we need to change, but we're going to open Claude Desktop first of all, and then we're going to go to settings up in the top left corner. We're going to go to the developer environment. You can see I've already got it set up, but what you're going to do is go edit config, and you're going to open the config file. And all you're going to do then is replace that with your code, the code that you've copied there. So it's an MCP server called n8n MCP. It's going to pull it from Docker. And the 2 things we need to change here are the n8n API URL and the n8n API key. So you're going to go to your n8n environment to grab this, and this will just give it access to actually create workflows in your environment. We're going to go to settings. You're going to go to n8n API, and you can see that I've created a key before. We're just going to call this demo key. We're going to give it an expiry of today so that it just nobody can actually access it on my account or tomorrow. And then we're going to copy that key directly. We're going to go back to the config file, and we're going to paste in our key just inside here where it says your API key. So let's copy that in. We're going to go back and we're going to copy our URL. So mine is this up here, everything before the slash. We're going to put it into there, and we're going to get rid of the slash at the end. And what we're going to do is just save that. And then to reload, what we're going to do is close Claude Desktop, and we will then reopen that. And once you've restarted, Claude will start now looking at that config file and working out what it needs to load up in terms of additional integrations or tools. So once it's reloaded, and it may take a couple of minutes to actually load fully, I'll show you how you know that it's been installed correctly. The projects, we're going to go to the little search icon down here, and you will see this n8n-MCP. You can open that up, and we will just enable all tools, and all of these are the different tools that it's able to access. What you're then going to do is set it up as a project and copy the prompt. So we're going to go to projects. I've already got this set up in n8n MCP, but if you don't, you just create a new project, and what you're going to do is edit the prompt up here, and you're going to take the prompt from the GitHub repo. You're going to scroll down, and there's this Claude project setup. You're going to copy that prompt. You're going to go directly back to the project instructions, save those instructions. You can add anything you want there, and now you are able to chat with that project. So whenever you do a new chat window, you can either come into the project itself or just go new chat and actually connect it to a specific project in there. So we would just say n8n MCP, make sure you use that project when you build this out. Okay, great. So let's start with actually building out one of the first workflows, which is going to be an autonomous research assistant. So when we're using the n8n MCP, it's going to prompt us to actually just allow the tools to actually perform. So each of the tools, and you saw that there were 39 tools, has got to go through an approval process. So we just need to either allow once or allow always. So this one, for example, validates a node operation. So this even goes to the extent of validating every single node and the operations that it's putting into the node. So it's like far above all the other workflow builders out there, because if you look through the steps, we've basically asked it to create an autonomous research assistant that takes an initial question, asks 2 to 3 clarifying questions, so gets a bit more information about scope. It then performs web searches across multiple sources, and we specified Tavily and Perplexity APIs because we know they're good for research, while validating credibility. So some way to validate that the confidence is high. The agent synthesizes findings from academic, industry, and news sources into a comprehensive report. So the output is a report with reliability scores, conflicting information is identified, and generates follow-up research suggestions, all delivered as a structured document with complete source attribution. So basically like a giant research agent. And you can see when we're going through this, it's now creating the JSON on the right-hand side. And one thing that you need to make sure you do when you actually run this is make sure it's on Claude Opus 4 and make sure that you've got extended thinking on as well. It performs much better once you've got extended thinking and Claude Opus 4. So with Claude Opus 4, you can see that it's now building out and kind of validating every step at a time. So with the extended thinking and Claude Opus 4, it's able to properly think through, and it gives us a little time frame of how long it's taken each individual step. Let me find the necessary nodes. So we've got a much quicker search nodes function here. It then lists out all the different nodes that it's found. Then it goes and finds the next one, but you can see that it's like iterating back and forth with itself, list nodes, search nodes, and doing all of these actions from the 39 tools that are attached down here. So we've got all sorts of tools down here. Got list node, which obviously, as it sounds, lists out all the nodes, list AI tools, search node properties, list tasks. So all of these different things are basically enabling the n8n MCP to build and construct a proper workflow that's then able to be imported directly into n8n. So we will see in a second when it completes how good that construction of this first workflow is. And one of the greatest things about this workflow builder is that it's got inbuilt validation. So I know I keep mentioning it, but the fact that it validates all connections, all operations, all nodes, and just validates the whole workflow before actually building it is so far superior to all of the other workflow builders that I've tried, because this was the biggest problem with previous workflow builders. They didn't validate anything, and it meant you got basically, so it's got to the end of its run and it says, excellent, the workflow has been successfully created and validated. Let me provide you with a comprehensive overview. So it gives us an overview of what the workflows are going to actually do, and then we can see it deployed inside n8n. So it accepts the initial research questions via webhook. It generates 2 to 3 clarifying questions. It performs parallel searches using Tavily and Perplexity APIs. Interested to see how it does that. It analyzes source credibility with a scoring system, identifies conflicts and consensus in the information, so maybe with an AI agent, and then generates a comprehensive research report. So it's got the output stage there. It then goes through the key features. So we've got 2-stage research process, intelligent query generation using Tavily, Perplexity, academic sources and industry news, some source credibility scoring, conflict analysis, structured output. So I'm going to just ask it to change that webhook input because we probably don't want it to actually send the initial research questions via webhook. Let's change it to a chat trigger so that we can test it out inside n8n. So we'll ask it to take it in a chat instead of webhook, and then we will ask it to deploy it, and we'll see what it looks like inside n8n. And it's going to automatically, because we've connected it to our n8n instance, actually deploy that as a new workflow and hopefully give us a link to that here. So it's come back here and it's asked me, would you like to add memory nodes to remember previous research sessions and a few other things, but I just want it at this point to deploy a first version for me. So I've asked it to deploy to n8n. And the cool thing about this is it now thinks about the actions it needs to take. So it needs to understand if there's a connection to n8n. So it's checking things like, is there an actual connection to that API URL? Does it receive a successful response? And then it starts creating the workflow. And then it might ask you to approve a few more stages as it like edits and updates parts of the workflow as it adds the nodes. And then it says, great, workflow successfully deployed. It gives you the name, the ID of the workflow. Talks a little bit about the workflow summary. So 20 nodes, which concerns me a little bit because it sounds like quite a lot. And then gives you instructions on how to actually use it. So type any research question, answer the clarifying questions, and then receive a report with exec summary, key findings, detailed analysis. And then I believe it's also told us the steps we need to take made. So we need to configure our API credentials to OpenAI, Tavily, and Perplexity. So let's open up the workflow now and see what it looks like. So we've come now into the workflow, and as with most workflow builders, they always come out a bit of a mess, and you've got to just work out what's connected to what to work out which bits are actually useful. So it looks a bit of a mess, but hopefully as we go through it, we can actually get some decent results. So we'll just do a quick skim through exactly what this is. So we've got a chat trigger and then some way to route the conversation, but that doesn't seem to have worked. Not sure how it's connected this switch node to this AI agent, but we've basically got like, are we generating clarifying queries? And then there's a prompt in there to basically generate 2 to 3 clarifying questions to go back to the user. I think it's got a little bit confused on the method to connect all of these things. So I can see at the later stages, we've got prepare API calls. Then we're going to make a call to Tavily and to Perplexity, probably with some research query or generate search query, probably this in here. And then it's going to basically score the results with a couple of other agents. Again, a bit of a mess in the way it's connected, but we can just delete those connections, tidy it up a little bit. So I'll tidy it up a little bit. I'll delete a few of these so that when we come back, we might have a more consistent workflow. And as I'm starting to break this down and work out what's connected to what and reconnect things so that they look proper, I've gone into this generate search queries. And what's really cool is, unlike many other workflow builders, it actually comes out with JSON output as well. So it's saying generate from a JSON example, basically some Tavily queries and some Perplexity queries, academic query and industry query, which is going to be passed into our Tavily and Perplexity search. So what we can do is just test this subsegment here, and we'll generate those search queries and then see if that actually runs through. We'll disconnect those bits. And this is the way you have to use these workflow builders, is actually cherry pick the bits that have come out exactly right. And we could go back and actually get the interface to edit these. But from what I found researching and going through this, it takes quite a lot of tokens to actually go back and forth with Claude to actually make edits, especially with a complex workflow. We're really testing it here with all of these different stages. I'm impressed it's output a potentially working flow of this size, but you're going to run out of tokens sooner or later. And I did actually run out of tokens with the 3 workflows that we're going to run through today. So let's try and test out this sub query here. So we've set the query in this set node here, what the best ways to rank for SEO on LLM tools like ChatGPT and Claude. And hopefully then it can come out with a research report from Tavily and Perplexity that feeds in and it generates a report here. I've noticed that inside things like prepare API calls, it kind of glitched out and not really done any code node here. So I know that that's not going to work, but let's start by executing the workflow and see if it's passed the query and see if we can get the first output from the LLM. And it's saying the model output doesn't fit the required format. What we can do is just add an auto-fixing JSON parser to this. Or actually, we can just go down and tick the box to be an auto-fixing parser and connect it back to the model in it predefined GPT-4 Turbo. So let's see if we can execute that again and get that through. But what you can see from the first workflow is it's not going to be perfect, but what it's going to do is set up the logic of the flow, which can then actually mean you start with a 60-70% version that you can start building out. It's almost like your MVP, and it's the best workflow builder I found for getting you to that 60 to 70% version. Sometimes if you're quick at building it, it's still quicker to build yourself, but we'll take a look at the lead generation of Reddit flows as well, as I think they're a bit simpler and hopefully it's done better than this larger workflow. So it's output the Tavily queries and Perplexity queries like SEO strategies for ranking on ChatGPT, SEO techniques for ChatGPT. So great, it's run that query through the LLM successfully. This isn't going to work. This is just going to pass the data. So let's get rid of that stage. And what we should instead do is look at the dynamic inputs from the HTTP requests and see if it's actually constructed these HTTP requests directly. So we've got the API key. So we'll go to the Perplexity API search one, and we're going to have to specify a specific model in here. But what it's done is given it a system prompt. So you're a helpful research system, provide comprehensive information with citations. And then it's tried to pass the query in, which isn't quite right. What we wanted to do was pass in, let's say, this 0th query there. And it's also put the other things in like max tokens, temperature, and return citations is probably going to be something like true. But if we try and simplify this, we could probably just get rid of these 3 things. I need to go and look at the Perplexity API request curl. gone to Perplexity to actually just get a curl request to compare. So it's got this endpoint, which is identified correctly. So good start. It's obviously put in the wrong header there, but we can change that to a Perplexity header auth. That's fine. We don't need this header parameter if we've got this specified as a header auth, so we won't send any headers. And then in the body, we want to say Sonar as the model. So all of these things probably shouldn't be passed in. They should be predefined, but those are more complex nuances. So we've got max tokens and temperature. So we don't need the return citations. I'm sure that will come. Max tokens, let's say 500 or let's say 1,000. And let's see if that now runs with a query. We'll just hide that one now. So let's rerun it and run it through Perplexity to see if actually it constructed the HTTP request 80% of the way there. And to my surprise, it actually did. So it's returned something from Perplexity API there. So let's set up the Tavily version here. So with Tavily, again, we need to set up an API key. So let's get rid of the header auth here. We just put that as none for now. We can pass in the API key potentially for the request. So I'm going to again go to Perplexity and just say, give me the curl request or Tavily API. Does it match this? So the fact I'm having to go and check is an indication on my confidence that it's got it right, which is low. So we need to send a post request to api.tavily.search. That's correct. So it's obviously picked up something inside there. And then inside the JSON, we've got bearer and then Tavily the key, query, search depth, include domains, exclude domains, and max results. So I did not have full confidence in that, but actually it's returned kind of every aspect rather than just like cherry picking the ones you need. So I would normally not put include domains, exclude domains. We'll leave this search depth as a standard or the default, same as max results. So actually all I want to do is send the query. Let's include search depth actually as basic, like it suggests in there. And let's get rid of max results. So let's try and pass in the API key like we would normally and pass in the query that's going to come from the previous stage. So if we just assume we're going to pass in the first query, we'll dynamically drop that in. So we should just have query and search depth. Now this isn't going to work because we have no authentication. So I'm going to go and get my API key from Tavily. So we're going to set up a standard generic credential type, header auth, and then we're going to create a new one for Tavily with the name authorization and then bearer space API key. So hopefully now that will pass in the query. And let's look at the merge search results. And it said keep matches from both inputs merged together, but it's not giving it fields to match columns. So let's just run it through. Let's save this as pinned output to speed it up. We'll run it through and then let's see if that passes through correctly. So it's saying JSON parameter needs to be a valid JSON. So clearly there's something wrong here. It's probably the comma in there. Let's execute that step again. And great, it's now completed the Tavily search and it's actually come back with the results. So actually it did construct those HTTP requests. So quite impressive, but it's not going to have merged them because it's not going to have known the outputs from each of the HTTP requests to merge the results on. So the next stage was like merging those results, processing and scoring the results. Again, the code node hasn't worked here. So we could probably go back to Opus, but I don't have any more credits and say, actually fix all the code nodes and it might give us a better representation. But I think it's probably quicker to have this MVP version and just hack it together once you've got a version here. So from my experience working with these flows, I know that a merge doesn't really make sense because there's two completely different outputs here. So all we're trying to do is basically pass in the outputs to this AI agent here or LLM node. Probably should be an LLM node, but it's an AI agent. And it's saying actually just process these results that come in. It doesn't matter if they come from Tavily or Perplexity. So what we're probably going to do is just add in a new merge node, but instead of that, just append the inputs, or we could just aggregate those inputs. So let's just append those inputs first. Let's pin the results so that we don't use any more API tokens, and we're just testing to get it right. So let's merge those or append those rather. So now we've got them in one large JSON. And what we're going to do is just effectively pass in all of the information from that JSON into here. So inside here where we've got results to analyze, you can see that it's set up this prompt. So analyze the following search results for conflicting information, consensus points, credibility assessment, information gaps, and source diversity. So it's provided a pretty good prompt there. And all we're going to do is just try and pass it all in. So let's have a look. It appears as object. So let's try and turn it into a large string. And a little trick here is to do JSON.stringify, wrap the JSON, And then if you put null too, it will format it nicely so we can actually read those results there. So you can see it's passed in all the info, and that's all the info from both sources. So hopefully that will analyze and construct there. We'll see how this acts because they're connected from the middle, whereas they should be connected there. So that might not work. Same as this chat model here, but we've got generate final report. These need to be turned to expressions. Again, it's kind of assumed some naming conventions here, like process and score results, but we've removed some of those tiles. So we're going to need to amend that, but we're nearly there in terms of taking it from a query. Bearing in mind, we've got rid of this generate clarifying questions. We're nearly there from taking a query to actually having a output report. So let's execute the workflow. And it's saying a chat model subnode must be connected. So again, it's just disconnect. It's not connected it quite correctly. We're going to just make sure that we have things like require specific output format on there. So you can see if you were a beginner builder, this is just only going to confuse you if you use a tool like this. But if you're somebody with a bit more experience, you'll understand the basics in order to connect it up just right. And again, we've got like the GPT-4 Turbo, but it doesn't say like from list or anything like that. So let's try and run it now. I'm not sure what the output is. It's basically like a complex JSON output of all of this information, which will then be passed into this generate final report. So let's see if we can get it to a final report, because it's not taking that long to get from this draft to a potential final report, which is actually pretty cool. I know we've had to work at it a little bit, but we'll see with the next examples how good and how close they get it. And we've kind of confidence checked the Tavily and Perplexity API requests, but actually they were 90% of the way there. That saved us a fair bit of time as well. So we've got 2 items as the output. I probably should have made that clear that actually it should be 1 output. So I should aggregate those inputs and only execute this once. So let's go through and actually do that. Let's aggregate that input. Let's execute it once, and let's sort out how to get this final report. So we aggregate those into one. This is where, again, it's more beneficial if you have experience building these out, because actually in hindsight, we don't need to merge and aggregate this data. We should just run these sequentially. They don't need to run in parallel. They're both separate search queries which can run. We just make sure that it's pulling the correct information from the correct node, and then what we can do is just pass that directly into here. So it will run once, and we basically just need to reference both bits of information. So we've got the JSON.stringify of the previous node, but we'll obviously need to get it from the Tavily node as well. So let's do the Tavily API search.item.json, and it's Tavily API search.item.json, probably .results. In some reason that's not working. Let's try again. And because of all the changes, I just needed to rerun the flow. So I've come back in now, rerun it, and now I'm referencing the correct nodes. So let's just make it really clear. So we're basically combining the results to analyze from Tavily and Perplexity. And that's what we're telling it to do. We're telling it to do it in one go. And then from the output of this is where we're going to generate the final report. So let's get rid of this first part. Generate a comprehensive but conversational report based on the original question, which we know comes from our set query. So in this case, we've got set query.item.json.original question, and then the search results. So let's bring out the search results again from Tavily and Perplexity. Let's just copy that over, and you can see how, because it's in the layout, we can focus on the like minor details like the search results and the analysis. So then in the analysis, we've obviously got the output from this analyze conflicts, which is probably going to be .json let's assume it's output, or .text. We'll see, and then it's going to formulate a final report in this format. So it's put there a format for us to generate in. It hasn't actually enforced that format, but let's see if it actually runs through. Okay, we've finally come to a point where it might have even given us an output. So we've got the generate final report here. Let's just check it passed in all of the information correctly. The original question, our results, and the analysis, it didn't pass through correctly. So we're going to need to change that. Output, we're going to need to stringify that again. So just make sure that that output is available for, there we go. We've got the analysis in there as well now. So let's re-execute the workflow. I've pinned a few nodes to speed it up, and we should then generate a final output. I think this final output is not going to appear correctly, again, for the same reason. It's probably going to appear as object. So we need to stringify that. But let's see what the output of the generate final report is. And then if that works, we have gone from a bit of a messy flow, but a initial search query around not knowing how to create a deep research agent to actually producing one in a fairly short space of time. So you can see that inside here, let's review this final output. Oh, it has actually carried the JSON over. So we've got all these final outputs, which we can see if we scroll over. We've got an executive summary. We've got key findings in here. here. We've got detailed analysis. So actually, it's done everything we've said. It's even put the sources in here, right? 7 large language model optimization strategies, Surfer SEO, credibility 80 out of 100. So it has gone from our initial query. If we go back up to our initial query, an autonomous research agent that takes your initial question, asks 2 to 3 clarifying questions. We kind of skip that part. Using Tably and Perplexity APIs, it actually created the HTTP request 90% versions, synthesizes the findings from academic, industry, and news sources, identifies conflicting information, generates follow-up research suggestions, and delivered as a structured document with complete source attribution and confidence ratings. So it does have source attribution and confidence ratings, but it's probably missing the fact that that's not really in a structured document. We didn't tell it, oh, put it into a Google Doc or a PDF or anything like that. But we've gone from that query to this workflow, which is actually quite nice. We've ditched this part in a short space of time. So let's see how it performs on the next one. So let's go on to the second workflow, which was all about creating a lead enrichment sales agent. So again, a little bit of a complex one, but transform basic lead information into complete prospect profiles by gathering info about the contact, enriching contact through multiple APIs. So we've been non-specific about the APIs, analyze competitive landscape and buying signals, generate a personalized outreach sequence, score the lead quality, identify the decision makers and warm introduction paths, deliver actionable sales intelligence directly to your CRM with priority flags for high value. So again, quite a complex intro prompt, giving it enough instructions that it can build out a workflow. It's gone through and actually built out, search for the different nodes, search for some different APIs that it could use for this lead enrichment. So actually gone out and done the research for, okay, what websites can I use to enrich these leads? And then delivered the code and hopefully configured some of those correctly, given us a workflow components. And then finally, it's actually deployed it to n8n after we've asked it to and given us a URL that we can go to. So let's open up that second one that's been deployed automatically in here. And we can see immediately this is way more simple than the one we had before. So we've kind of got the lead input, which comes via webhook. So we might want to change that. Extract the lead data. So lead email, lead name, company, domain, a timestamp. And then it basically passes that into 3 different APIs. We'll have a look, see if it's configured anything good there. Aggregate the scores. So again, it's maybe misunderstood a little bit of how we would operate the n8n workflows. And actually it should put those sequentially. So we can change that. It's then going to generate personalized insights. Hasn't given it a prompt this time. So that is interesting, but it basically then has formatted the final output and updated that inside our CRM. And you can see that it's opened up the HubSpot CRM, put the email in there from the initial node, put the industry, and then we probably want to add a few more details there. We're not going to build this out to its completion, but we'll have a look at the HTTP requests and see if those have been built out correctly. So it's identified that Clearbit, who I've not heard of before, could potentially find more information about a domain. So let's go to Clearbit and see what they do. So this is the bit that actually is quite difficult when you're building out workflows, is identifying the right API services. So if it can do this well for us, then that's really cool. Clearbit has joined HubSpot. Clearbit, let's try Clearbit API. Company name to domain API. Takes a company name and returns their website domain and logo. That's not quite what we're looking for. We're actually putting it in a domain and finding out company information. Enrichment API. So it's gone and worked out that actually there is an enrichment API here. If we go, what does an enrichment payload look like? We can skip ahead to company data. We can pass in a domain, and then hopefully it will give us a bit more information about this. I'm not sure we are able to actually access this for free. So let's look. Clearbit pricing starts at $45 a month for 100 credits. So we're not actually going to be able to test that one out. $99 a month for 275 API credits in there. So perhaps we could have got a free one there. A tech stack analysis with built with. So if we're importing a domain, which it seems like we are here, it's kind of, domain, company, lead name, lead email. Then we get a tech stack analysis with built with. So if we are a tech company, for example, we would understand exactly what they are using, plans and pricing on built with. Again, we're not going to be able to do this. It's almost like it's picking out all tools that are too out of our budget, but it's got the right idea of analyze the tech stack to see what they're using, analyze the company information, and presumably it would output lots of information about the company, and then find the social media presence using brand fetch. So this one's interesting. Another one that I've not heard of, where brands live. So what we could do, if we go on the pricing there, is actually the internet's go-to source for logos and brand assets. Interesting. So it would basically give us the logo for free, but then anything above that, we'd basically be able to pull information about their brand from what I can see and like their different social media presence. And from that, we'd basically be able to generate insights. But right now, it hasn't actually given us anything useful in terms of a personalized insight because there's no prompt inside here. And then in terms of the email templates, it's actually also not given us a prompt. So not a brilliant output. We can try and rerun this later when we've got more credits, but for now we've run out of Opus credits on there. It's going to format that final output and then actually update our CRM, but it's kind of like it's created these really well by identifying the HTTP requests, the correct APIs, and actually setting those up. But then when it's got to this later stage, it's kind of fallen apart a bit. So we might have saved a little bit of time in this stage, maybe less so in the later stages. So we'll move on to the next one, which is all about creating a Reddit social intelligence analyst. So we basically want it to search Reddit using Apify scrapers. And the reason I've asked for Apify scrapers is because the inbuilt n8n Reddit node, I know you have to set up an app inside Reddit. So I'd rather use an Apify scraper that's done the hard work for me and just maybe pay a little bit. Use that to monitor for brand mentions, taking a brand in a set or edit fields node. Then whilst doing that, perform sentiment analysis on the brand mentions there. It should categorize conversations for complaints, praises, feature requests, and then generate daily digest reports for marketing, product, and development. And then competitive intelligence briefs for sales, but also an integration with Slack for alerts. So this is kind of like a blanket approach for just throw it loads of information and see what happens. And yeah, let's come back and see exactly how that performs. So we've gone through, as you can see, several different conversations here trying to get this one working. And this is part of the problem with using workflow builders. They're great for very simple workflow outputs, but as soon as you've got something that's not very defined, so I've defined a few things in there, but it's kind of left a lot of ambiguity, then you will often have errors. So it's tried to put out a workflow, but as you can see, it's blank and it says could not find workflow with an error. I've then tried to troubleshoot it a couple of times through different conversations. It thinks it's found the error, but can't quite fix the error. And then a couple of times I've hit the maximum length for the conversation, because the blessing and the curse of having so many tools attached, 39, is that actually it's passing so much information every time it uses a tool call to Claude that I'm quickly either running out of tokens and the amount I can use and I've had to upgrade to max, or it's, passing so much back that I'm having to start new chats and then the same problem happens again. So finally, I got to a position where I've created a version, I'll find here, which might have now been removed. There we go, a version of this that we can run through. But I just don't want to sugarcoat that actually, if you are not defining things correctly, or you are, giving it an input paragraph, but haven't thought about the logic of the workflow, then this is going to struggle a little bit more. It might do a good job of giving you a first version, in which case, great, because it sets you up for success to actually go in and edit it, like our first and second workflows. But as soon as it has a bit of ambiguity, it could start failing, and then actually takes you a long time to troubleshoot it, and you might have been better off just starting by yourself. But that is the reality of where the tools are at this stage. And I don't want to pretend like everything that comes out of this tool is perfect, because it's not. So we've got the Reddit social intelligence flow here. So every 15 minutes, it's set up this trigger correctly. It's monitoring basically for different brand mentions. So inside this configuration file, we can basically fill out our brand keywords, competitor keywords, industry keywords, and it's gone into quite some detail to do that. If I run it, it's not going to work anyway because it's not connected to Reddit or Twitter. But you can see that it's basically trying to actually connect to certain subreddits, but it hasn't passed in the keyword. So that's something we could quite easily add if we had a Reddit account, the same as searching on Twitter. So actually it has passed in a keyword there on the competitor keywords from that configuration node that would be passed in. It then has the same thing where it wants to merge those bits of data, which is the right logic, but not necessarily how you would lay this out inside n8n. What you might do is actually just lay those in sequence. They're going to run either way, one after another, and then actually you'd call on those results inside your analyze sentiment. It tends to use the GPT or OpenAI node here. I would conventionally use the LLM, but that's not a problem. It doesn't seem to have passed any information into the prompt here. So it's not done its greatest job here, but it has laid out the flow and the logic of the flow so that you could go in and do things. And then in some cases, it has added the parameters correctly. But for the more tricky things like the prompts, it hasn't done a brilliant job on this last one. And then inside process and categorize, I guess this is looking for sentiment scores, etc. That if it had filled out the prompts, probably would have output a node here. I would usually go back into the instance of Claude here and tell it to edit it, but actually I've done it 4 or 5 times already and it's still giving out broken workflows. So I'm just showing you the reality of the workflow that will come out of this sometimes. It then goes through some decision point where it's like, okay, is there a crisis? And it assumes that actually out the end of this, there'd be a crisis score, is crisis, is influencer, mentions brand. So it's put all of that framework in place in the code node. But like a lot of other workflow tools, it reverts when it doesn't know how to do things to just making a code node. So that is kind of the right logic, I guess, but there are probably better ways that would be able to do this. So these tools are set up for people that have a bit of experience building out workflows. I wouldn't recommend starting with this tool if you've never built out a workflow before, because it's just going to confuse you even more. You're going to end up reworking everything. But for somebody who's got a bit more experience, you can see that actually, oh, okay, I wouldn't do it like that. I do it like this instead. And it gives you the general layout and you can come in and change 1 or 2 nodes and fill in the details, etc. These will get better over time. And I imagine this n8n MCP, it's already far better than a lot of the other workflow builders, will continue to get better. One, in the setup, it will become hosted soon. And I know if you go to the GitHub, Romuald is now building out a hosted version. So hopefully soon the setup will be significantly easier. Hopefully on Claude, you won't have to approve every single step. And then hopefully it will use fewer tokens to execute the same task and be a bit quicker, because at the moment it's fairly slow, but still it is brilliant, but just not quite there for a production ready, more complex workflow. In my other tutorial about this, I cover how to, the other gap here, which is actually how to build out the logic of a flow and pass that into the prompt to Claude, because actually what it's kind of missing in this is it doesn't understand what nodes it should use, and therefore it's just searching for key terms that it think would be a good node and then picking up a node, and it's not necessarily the right logic. But if we directed it more around, these are the nodes I think I should use at the different stages, then it probably would be able to piece together with that logic a more logical flow. So it ends up with a send urgent message, which is great. It fills out the urgent message. We just need to actually connect it to a channel, and it's already connected it to the Slack credentials. And then here we've got like generate reports. So again, it's really good at things like actually putting in a report structure. And actually this would probably be decent, and I won't be able to test it because we don't have the data, but outputting an actual report and then sending that report to Slack. So that stuff is really great. This node would typically store data in a database. For now, it logs the data structure. So great, it's understood that actually it's logging the data there. We just need to connect it to a database like a Postgres database or whatever to actually send it. So to sum up, we've built out 3 agents from scratch here. Although they're not all entirely complete, you can see and get a good flavor of how n8n MCP is developing really quickly. It can now put things into production. It can now make edits, but it's still not perfect yet for production ready workflows. But I'd highly recommend checking it out, giving it a go on Claude, because actually you'd be surprised by how good you can get it if you put in some good logic. Thank you so much for watching. Give the content a like and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.